Mushrooms! I love mushrooms! And today I made a mushroom grove out of polymer clay. Stick around to the end of the video to see all the itty bitty details. I hope you enjoy it! If you ended up watching the last video, you would have known that I used this wooden base at the start when I screwed up on an owl. So I recycled it this video, drilled some extra holes to start with the giant mushroom base. So I wrapped lots of foil around the piece of wire, as well as a bit at the top for the extra bit of, I don't know what you call it, the mushroom bit. You know the mushroom bit at the top of the mushroom bit? I don't know what the mushroom bit is, but it's a mushroom bit. I wrapped the clay that I rolled out around the mushroom stem and blended it together a little bit with my fingers. I added an extra 4 pieces of wire to the base, just to add as a bit of extra stability. I also blended the clay to the wood, just to hold it there. The mushroom cap was quite difficult to do because I had to use 8 pieces of wire and find a way to hold them together, which isn't very easy, so I stuck them into some clay and decided to wrap some masking tape around them, just to hold them together. I was really stupid though and ended up taking it off the clay, so they all fell apart. So I had to put them back into the clay and added another piece of masking tape just to hold them all together so that they wouldn't fall apart again. Once they were together and stable, I took off the clay and added some foil to secure the cap and make it actually fully flat. Ready for the clay that I rolled out. I wasn't going to hand roll this, of course I was going to use my pasta roller. If I did end up rolling this with a rolling pin, I think I would actually have bruises on my hands, which isn't great. Before detailing the top of the cap, I did the bottom so that I could have a place to hold it before adding details on the top. I added the little rows which you would find underneath the mushrooms. I don't know what they're called and I haven't searched it up, but I added lots of them and then blended them in and added some little lines across them to make them look more detailed and yummy. Hopefully one day I'll know how to record without shoving my hand straight in the camera. I used my bigger mini finger to add the little line details and then also added a rim around the edge of the cap. Once the underside of the cap was done, I added some little bits on the top. I ended up later making these gold, but I was at first planning to make them green like moss, but I think they turned out quite well. At this point I still hadn't realised yet that the cap was it was too heavy and it would have weighed down the stem, but I just kept on adding more clay because, you know, I love clay, and this took half a block of clay. Just the cap alone took half a block of clay. And then I added the little cute details like the moss with my little pointy tool. I also spent a lot of time scribbling into the clay to give this nice kind of texture on it. Don't be fooled by the time lapse, as this took a lot of time. Woo! You can actually see here how upright the mushroom is supposed to be. By the end of it, it's pretty much fully fallen down. I used my bigger mini finger to add these little line details into the top of the mushroom bit there that I forgot the name of still, that I don't know the name of. As my clay glue is a bit ancient at this point after 3 years and a bit stiff, I used a toothpick to scrape it out of the bottle and I kind of spread it over the base here so that the clay would adhere a bit better. To give it a nice blend off the edge of the wood, I just smushed it down a little bit. Although it's a mushroom and not a tree, I added these lines and swirls down the side of the stem to give it a bit more of a bark looking detail. This is just because I think with the mushroom being so big, if it were to actually exist, it would have to have a bit of a rougher exterior, not the squishiness that it usually would have. Using more of my clay, I added these little balls onto the ground to act as moss. I use my rounded I broke it by pushing it too hard and it kind of got bent, but it's perfect for this detail now. I kind of run it along pushing it in, making little balls, divots, and it turns out to look like moss. I then begin to plan and make all the other mushrooms. Obviously they're going to be a lot smaller than the bigger one. So I start off just by cutting some clay, then adding the wire into it, and then making the cap a bit floppy and smushing down the edges. Then I carve out the inside and add little swirls on top. Then add little details again. And then I assemble it. If that'll ever come by, come on. No, okay, still not on. There we go. We assembled it. And it looks like a cute little mushroom, and it's a lot smaller than the big one. And I add more moss around the edges so that it stays in, holds it there. I put the wire in, I smush it again, I do the underside, I do the top side, I do more details, I add the glue, moss, yeah. I then cut out a lot of wire to make a bunch more. Roll it out, and this is bad, don't do this, please don't do this. Look, I cut it on my finger, don't do that, please don't. As you know by now, we just put the wire in, put the clay in, and then make the mushroom caps. This one's pointed and has little divots in the side. This one's rounded at the top and has little divots in the side. And this one has little spots in it. And then we put it all down with the moss around it to make sure that it's all set and secure. And then I start getting to work on the mushroom people. I start off with some foil and wrap some clay around it, and I actually use my nails to my advantage here to carve out a perfect angle where the legs are going to sit. I add these little slabs as their hands and carve into them to make 2 fingers. I don't think a full hand would really be fitting for these mushroom people. I then start working on the eyes. I add 2 little white dots and a big black dot, and then a bunch of different colours for the 4 different mushroom people I'm going to make. I then start on one which is more flat, which is actually going to be lying on the mushroom, kind of climbing up it to get these little stones that I'm going to put in later. This one I'm making is going to, I think, resemble more of an old lady. When making their hats, I had to keep in mind that they needed to be big, but also have enough detail in them so that they looked interesting. This one I added little grooves in the side to make it look all bubbly. Of course, I had to make sure that the underside was decorated enough, and then also gave it a bit of a line in between the body and the hat. I used my mini finger to add these little grooves, and also this pointed one to add dots. I then had to use my bigger ball tool to create the eye sockets where I'm going to shove the eyes in. And I can't keep it on camera apparently. Anyways, I gave it some eyelids, smoothed that out, and he looked a bit angry at first, but then he had a little bit of a smile to him. He's a cheery little guy. I wanted all of them to have an interest in those little stones. I also gave him grooves along his body as well. Now, I don't know how many of you have played the game Spiritfarer, but this one's hat reminded me a lot of Stella's hat. Like the bigger mushroom, I gave this one dots on the top of its hat. And then I went in with my little tool, made a little details. I gave this one only one eye, not because it was one-eyed, but because the other eye is going to be closed. I used this little pointer tool this time to create the eyelid instead. I gave him a button nose just like the others, and then moved his hand so that it would be touching his cap. I made sure all of their hats were different enough, so I made this one have a swirl on hers. Again, just like the others, I scratched into its cap and gave it a little nose. I ended up wanting to make a 4th one, so I made it a little baby that was going to be looking at the stone that the other one's holding. This one only has one eye though. The baby gets the same treatment as the others, with little dots in its hat. After I had baked them in the oven to make them all stiff, I made sure that they would be able to sit properly in between the moss. I also added extra moss around it to hold it in place. If you couldn't tell by now, I like doing moss. I really like doing moss. If I could, I would just do moss for the rest of my life. I love doing moss. Moss. I also made some flowers by cutting out some triangles from a circle of clay. Sometimes I use the ends of my tools to curve my clay. I also made some bigger flowers, but I completely forgot to record it. I then started the process of making all the teeny tiny little mushrooms. I made them lots of different shapes and sizes, from pointed ones to flat ones with the little dots on top. I did have to end up using a lot of my clay glue because I was really scared that they were all going to come off. I also decided to add a couple stones by using some crumpled up foil and rolling it over the clay. Kind of makes it look a bit spiky. I decided that I wanted to use 3 different coloured stones that this old one's going to be looking down at. Like I said earlier, I did around 60 different mushrooms, all different sizes and shapes. This one has a swirl on it. This one has little dots on it. This one's small. This one's long. I'm never going to stop doing moss. I'm just going to keep adding moss. More moss. Sorry for the big jump between adding all the mushrooms and baking it, and now I'm in a different room with barely any lighting. And I tried to use my airbrush, but it wouldn't really work. I got about halfway done with the top of the cap and then realised that I didn't really want to keep using my airbrush, so I just went back to painting. Instead of doing the smooth gradient that I planned to do with the airbrush, I decided to use the texturing that I did earlier to my advantage to do the gradient. I did have to put multiple coats of the magenta on because, as you can see, where I overlapped it with the blue, it did go slightly darker. Also around the edges I put a darker purple as well. I'll be honest, looking back at this makes me quite upset. I used such a pretty colour for the underside of the mushroom cap, and then by the end of it I had overlapped it with so many different horrible colours that it just looks so muddy now. On the brighter side, the top of the mushroom looks great, in my opinion at least. I used a gold for all of the little details that I was talking about earlier. I was going to do green, but I went with gold because I think it kind of looks a bit more magical, kind of goes with the theme a bit better. I also put some gold on the edges too, just to give it a bit more extra colour. And then I started on the moss. Although it looks very dark at first, it does get quite bright. This took almost a day to paint. As in just the moss alone, not the whole thing, just the moss. I then went in with this kind of pinky yellowish light colour for the stems of each mushroom. To start brightening up the moss, I dry brushed. To dry brush, all you need to do really is just get some paint on your brush, wipe some of it off, and then gently drag your paintbrush over the details. It'll keep the darker areas dark and the lighter areas on top. I also ended up using gold on the moss. I don't know why, don't know what came over me, but it looks really nice. It gives it a bit more glow, and it kind of goes with the theme a bit more. And then I started painting the mushrooms themselves. I wanted to go with really bright, vibrant colours, like this one is going from a gradient. I also used my sponge to blend, like I did in the last video with Garfield. I use a different range of colours, from purple to blue to orange to pink and red and green. Lots of different colours, and I try to keep them as bright as possible. With the smaller mushrooms, I did want to go with a generic theme. For the ones that were taller, I made them purple, pink or magenta. The flat ones, I made brown, and the flat ones with the little dots on top, I made red and then of course coloured the dots white. Some of the pointed ones also do have dots. I just kept them purple, pink or magenta, and also had the white dots on top. There weren't very many flowers at all. I think there's about 5 in total, 5 or 6. Some of them were white, some of them were pink with purple or pink with magenta, and then other ones were yellow. When painting the bodies of the mushroom people, I intended to go with a bit of a lighter colour, but I ended up going quite dark, and that's fine. With the baby one and the one on top of the mushroom, I did go a little bit pinker though. I also gave them a cutesy little blush on their cheeks. I accidentally used red instead of pink for the blush, but I think it's cute anyways. I also gave him a lavender nose, which I darkened, and then put lavender on top again. I gave this one a black nose, and also a brown cap. Not a brown cap, that is not brown. That isn't brown. Blue. This one has a pink cap, and the one on top of the mushroom has a red cap. As the final touch, I added a nice gloss over the entire thing. Well, not the entire thing, but the big mushroom cap, and all the other little mushroom caps. And here we are. A fallen down mushroom, a cramped little grove, and too many colours to even know what's going on. I think this actually did come out quite nice. Thank you for sticking around, I really do appreciate it. And if you did like it, consider liking the video. And if you also want to see more like this, also consider subscribing. Ooh, oh, I can't speak. Subscribe.